Are you torn between the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter contemporary lens and the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter sports lens? Well, you're not alone. I think a lot of photographers end up making a decision between these two lenses. If you're looking for a lens to shoot wildlife, sports, or any other type of image where you really need to have a good telephoto, a good range, then both of these lenses are great options. But how do you choose between them? Many of you know that I purchased the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens to do some wildlife photography out west. A few weeks later, I had the chance to borrow the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter lens for a few weeks. They are both fantastic lenses, and I made a video about each of them. So let's compare them and see which one might be a better choice for you. Did I regret my initial purchase, or am I happy with my decision? I'll let you know at the end, so keep on watching. But before I get into it, I just want to say the camera I was using the Canon mounts of these lenses on my Canon 5D Mark IV. So let's look at the lenses and let's start with the size and weight. Size and weight. This is the most obvious characteristic that just cannot be ignored. The size and weight. The Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens weighs 4.25 pounds. Meanwhile, the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter weighs 5.95 pounds. That's a difference of about 1.7 pounds. And believe me, you definitely feel the difference here. At least I did. At first I thought the 150 to 600 millimeter lens was heavy, but after using the 60 to 600 millimeters for a few weeks, the former felt light in comparison. So I guess it's just all relative and what you're used to. Many people like to use both of these lenses with monopods or tripods because of the weight, and while I did occasionally use a tripod, I did spend more time hand-holding both of these lenses because I like to be a little more mobile when I'm out shooting and just move around really quickly. And I don't mind the muscle soreness. But if you're shooting video, especially at the 600 millimeter focal length, you'll probably want to use a tripod to get those smooth shots. Range. The biggest difference between these two lenses is, of course, the range. The Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter obviously has way more range than the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeters. That means you can get a greater diversity of photos with these 60 to 600. If you're out shooting wildlife, for example, and you want to capture more of the setting that the wildlife is in, then having that wider end of the range is fantastic. If you want to grab a few landscape photos while you're out there, that 60 millimeter focal length can also come in handy. Sometimes you might even find yourself really close to the subject that you're shooting, which is another reason that having more range is practical. And of course, having that extra range will probably eliminate the need to carry a few other lenses with you, which will also mean less lens switching. So just to examine the range of the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter lens, here are a set of photos taken at different focal lengths. Now to compare, here are photos taken with the 150 to 600 millimeter at different focal lengths. Sharpness. I have been able to create very sharp images with both of these lenses, and I tried really hard to see if one of them produced sharper images than the other. When I examined the photos taken with the exact same settings in the exact same location and at the exact same focal length, I am really struggling to see much of a difference. To me, it looks like the 60 to 600 millimeter lens produces photos that are like a teeny tiny bit sharper when I zoom in all the way, but the difference is so small that I'm really not sure if I'm imagining it. But it's a difference you definitely wouldn't notice if you're looking at the photo at 100%. Overall, whenever I used either of these lenses in good lighting, I was able to create sharp images that I am happy with. Lens aperture. The Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens has a variable maximum aperture of f5.0 to f6.3, while the 60 to 600 millimeter has a maximum aperture of f4.5 to f6.3. At 600 millimeters, they both have a maximum aperture of f6.3. This means that you definitely want to have a lot of light when taking photos with either of these lenses. The more light, the better. My sharpest images with these lenses were actually taken in the middle of the day. And if you're taking photos at dawn or dusk, or when it's kind of dark, you will probably have to push your ISO. If your camera can handle high ISOs like mine can, then this shouldn't be a problem. But if you're shooting with an older camera or an entry-level camera or just any camera that struggles in low light, then this might be something that you'll want to take into consideration. Tripod mount collar. Both lenses come with a tripod mount collar, a lens hood, a padded case, and a shoulder strap. However, take a look at the tripod mount collar of the 60 to 600 millimeter. It's definitely a better quality mount, bigger of course, and just feels sturdier on my tripod. The lens hood for the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter is also of a higher quality, and it has a little screw that you can use to attach it. Zoom lock. Both of these lenses have a zoom lock switch that you can use to lock your focal length in place. I noticed that with the 60 to 600 millimeter, I needed to use this when I was walking around and trying to keep my focal length at a certain level. I'm sure that the weight of this lens is responsible for the fact that it can slide to different focal lengths easily, as you can see in this video clip right here when I unlock the lock switch. With the 150 to 600, I did not notice this happening. Of course, there are a lot of characteristics that these two lenses have in common as well, some of which I'm going to put on the screen here, which you can pause and look at. But for this video, I wanted to focus more on the differences, not so much on what they have in common. Now, the big question, which lens should you get? Well, if it's just based on the capabilities alone, the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter is obviously the clear winner because it does have that range, which gives you the ability to take a greater diversity of photos. But price and weight are also factors to consider for most people. The 150 to 600 millimeter costs around $900 on B&H right now, while the 60 to 600 costs about $2,000. The 150 to 600 millimeter also weighs 1.7 pounds less than the 60 to 600. And for many people, they want to try to minimize the amount of weight they're carrying around. So this is how I see it. And this, by the way, is my personal opinion and not professional advice. Please always make your camera lens decisions based on your own extensive research. If you're on a tight budget and you just want to have a telephoto lens for the occasional wildlife photo, then the 150 to 600 millimeter lens is probably sufficient. If you mostly take photos of birds, for example, and not really anything else, then the 150 to 600 is probably sufficient, since you might not need that extra range. You might not need that 60 millimeter range. Because, birds are probably not going to get that close to you, unless you're like feeding them, I guess. If, on the other hand, you plan to use this lens for a variety of different photography, from landscapes to street photography to sports and wildlife, then you might want to consider the 60 to 600 millimeter instead. That lens will allow you to capture the occasional group photo of a bunch of athletes who maybe are posing for you, or some closer landscapes, or a subject that's really close to you. In my case, I'm happy with the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter because in my day-to-day photography, I tend to use more wider angle lenses, and I don't need that telephoto range too often. I did, however, want to have a telephoto lens for the occasional wildlife photo I will take, or the occasional trip out into nature that I will take. Living in Washington, D.C., I'm definitely also going to be using this lens next time I attend some sort of outdoor event where there's a speaker far off into the distance, and maybe I want to zoom in on that speaker giving a speech. I have some ideas for how I could use it here. But honestly, both of these lenses are fantastic choices. I mean, they can both do amazing things, and I don't think you can go wrong with either one of them. You just have to look at yourself as a photographer and say, what kind of photos do I take? And what kind of photos do I want to take? And which lens is going to best serve me to take those kinds of photos? And yes, of course, there are other lenses that are comparable, made by different brands. But in this video, I just wanted to do a comparison of the two lenses that I have been using because I just don't have experiences with some of those other brands. If you want to read more about either of these Sigma lenses, then definitely check out the links in my description below, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and check out my other 2 videos about these lenses if you want to see more of the photography I was able to capture with both of them. Those videos are more about, going out and taking photos with the lenses and kind of sharing my results with you. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.